Hey there, DevCentral community. This is John, and this is the Security Sidebar, DevCentral Connects. It's Thursday at 12:30 Pacific, and we are coming to you like we always do every week. So we are excited to bring you some security-related topics today. And before we kind of get started, I've got two amazing people with me today to just make this an awesome time for everyone. Wanted to remind everybody, hit that subscribe button if you want to see this show, if you want to get notified about this show, and all of the other great content that comes out on our DevCentral YouTube channel. And so again, today we're streaming live to YouTube and LinkedIn and Periscope and all the places. So if you got any questions or comments, feel free to engage with us, talk to us today. And so with that, this is a little bit shorter show today. We've got 30 minutes, and so I want you guys to hang in there with us, and it's going to be amazing. I've got two of the great minds of F5 here today from the F5 Labs team. I've got Mr. Malcolm Heath and Mr. Sander Vinberg. So let me bring them on and welcome them to the show. So Malcolm and Sander, welcome to DevCentral Connects and the Security Sidebar. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome, man. So Sander, I'm going to start with you really quick, if I could, and say we've got some predictions that were put in place, and I guess there's maybe kind of this trend of predictions, cyber or security related predictions from the F5 Labs team. So maybe tell us about like how these predictions came about and what's going on with those things.
Yeah, sure. It was kind of a funny thing, right? Because obviously at the end of every calendar year, these kinds of articles are everywhere, right? And normally that wouldn't be something that we would be racing to do, but the way it unfolded was that our director, the head of the labs team, worked on a piece like a few months into lockdown, and basically what he wanted to do was sort of capture how much IT environments were changing as a result of people trying to keep the lights on during the pandemic. So like everybody working remote and stuff like that. But he didn't want to just do another piece about securing your VPN, Yeah. So he wrote this kind of interesting thing, and he's got kind of like a writer streak in him. So he wrote this thing that was like a letter from the future looking back at the present about everything that changed. And like his main point was just that, we're never going to go back and fix any of this stuff, and it was a really cool article, and it was like a little bit different from your average thing about VPN and RDP. So we worked on it together, and while we were working on that, we sort of made this observation that there was all this tech talent that had been let go of jobs that were going to be in a position to maybe like chase that idea that they had always had in their mind but they wouldn't have done it when they had like the golden handcuffs of a steady job, and now they're out of work. And so we were thinking like we might see a boom of startups at the end of 2020. And then a couple months later in November, I ran across an article that said like all this freed up labor from the pandemic has resulted in a boom of startups in 2020. And I was like, oh my God, dude, we got one right, So and then at the same time as that, we were watching the SolarWinds thing unfold, and we actually ran across a prediction from somebody who had been at F5 several years before I came on, and it was after the WannaCry campaign that he made some predictions about sort of trends in command and control domains for sophisticated attacks. And the SolarWinds thing ended up being exactly that. And what he was talking about is the use of absolutely novel command and control domains, sort of making it impossible to track a malware domain until the big event, right? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we saw with SolarWinds. So I was like, it's 2 for 2. And so instead of retiring undefeated, we were like, what other predictions could we make about kind of how things are going right now? And so we started kind of just collecting up what we thought. And I've been kind of ranting about phishing a lot lately. And so that was the first one. And we reached out to not just people in labs, but people we know all over the community within F5, people who think about security in different ways. And we got some really interesting predictions. We ended up with 8 that made it into the article, and there were about 3 more people that told me that they want to get in on another one because they didn't make it in time, but they have more predictions. And it turned into such an interesting article because it really spans a wide range of the specializations within security, and it gave this interesting view. Although it also, when you look at them all together, the overwhelming theme is that everything is a mess and just chaos right now. So it's not like the most encouraging article we've ever published, but it was really interesting to put together.
Hey, it's real life, Sander. I mean, we call it like it is, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
We predict what we believe is the truth, and then as it turns out, it actually is the truth. So what a fascinating thing. It's just I mean, everybody's got their top 10 list of the new year or whatever, but this is a pretty cool one, and to know that you hit 2 for 2 on those first couple, it's amazing. So. Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, Malcolm, I wanted to ask you something really quick, but before we do that, super quick, I wanted to just give a shout out to Mr. Boo Lamb, which, by the way, everyone watching here, Sander and Malcolm were on the Boo's Hour with Boo and Daryl. So, if anyone has not seen that, make sure you go check out their show on YouTube and LinkedIn and all places. So, great to see Mr. Boo out there. And then Miss Sarah Body, hey, who's the security oracle? We're talking to 2 of them today, Sander and Malcolm, right? We'll get to Malcolm here in a second. And then Anis, it's always good to see you out there, my man. Hey, Anis, really quick, I saw your post on LinkedIn. You got all the swag, all the DevCentral stuff. You're rocking and rolling, man. Appreciate everything you do out there. So good to go, man. Well, hey, so Malcolm, speaking of security oracles, I hear that you have absolutely, hit the bullseye with one of your predictions. So maybe tell us about that thing, man.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about predictions is they get progressively harder to do the longer the scope you're looking for. So I tried to keep it pretty straightforward and pretty short term. Right. And what I was looking at was really just I saw a trend of a whole bunch of changes in the social media space, right? There were people who were moving to Parler, people who were moving from Messenger or WhatsApp to other messaging platforms, this kind of thing, due to a whole variety of different reasons. And I realized that that some of those platforms that people were moving to hadn't been around very long, didn't have a huge user base, and were being hit with an influx of a ton of people, and maybe had not been staffed or developed quite to the level of robustness that some of the other ones had. Yeah. I said, this seems like a really, really good place to start thinking about some things, like specifically, how good is the security of those? Have they been doing the right kinds of things? Have they been spending their money and time in making their platforms, highly secure? Are the attackers going to follow people off of the main platforms onto these smaller ones, and what opportunities will present themselves to attackers? And that's really it. As it turns out, I did say that I was predicting that there would be a breach. Now, I'm really lucky that I said breach and not like compromise with these specific parameters, because as it turns out, Parler's, you could argue whether or not it was a breach, but essentially they had some APIs that were maybe not functioning quite the way they expected, which allowed a great deal of their content to be downloaded. So I'll take it. I'll take credit for that.
Malcolm, we'll give you credit, man, where credit is due. That's
well,
awesome.
it was like particularly amazing, right? Because we were collecting all this before the holidays, and Malcolm wrote it and sent it over to me in mid-December. And then with the holidays and people being in and out and stuff, we didn't publish until the 6th, which was the day of the attack on the Capitol, right? And it was on the 8th that we heard that all this Parler data had been pulled down, right? So our article had actually been public. Malcolm wrote it 3 weeks before it happened, and it had only been public for 2 days before it happened, and it was just like one of those.
It's like, wow,
perfect timing. Yeah, it was amazing. So we were all pretty gratified about that.
You know, when I first heard about this, I was like, man, Malcolm has got, he's got the edge on the market. And so jokingly, I was like, Malcolm, are there any stocks that you're looking to buy right now? Any investments you're interested in? So no, but man, what a great thing. And frankly, as you break it down, Malcolm, it makes a lot of sense that it's like, hey, these companies have a huge influx of new users, and they're trying to like get up and running, and they're trying to like, run or sprint before they can crawl or whatever, right? It's not the crawl, walk, run. It's, let's just start sprinting. and that's inevitably going to lead to some problems, right? So yeah, but great.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Sandra, I know Malcolm mentioned some of the API stuff that were APIs that Parler used that were not quite working the way that they thought, or whatever, and which leads us into maybe a little bit bigger of an API discussion. And I know you've got some thoughts around that. So maybe drop some truth on us about API stuff.
Yeah, well, that was the other thing about it that was so funny to me, because I spent a lot of my summer digging into the way that API use and design has changed over the last few years, and what that meant for changing environments, like changing tech stacks, and how businesses were sort of building their tech functionality into their business model, right? And it was really interesting, because I the first thing that stood out was like, okay, the API related incidents of a sort of wide variety, like authentication failures, authorization failures, stuff like that. They're becoming a lot more common. And I was kind of going around and beating that drum, and I got not exactly like eye rolls, but a lot of folks kind of didn't bite on that intelligence or conclusions or whatever, because they kind of said, look, APIs have been around for decades. There's nothing new here. And what I was kind of arguing is that, like, if you talk about a single API that you're using to coordinate two different things, like, yeah, that's pretty old stuff. Even if we're just talking about REST, like, we've known about REST APIs for some time. But when you talk about an internet where every single organization is building their entire business model around it, and every big enterprise has like 400 published APIs, that's a different ball of wax, right? And so what I was saying is that the fact that we've known about this thing in one form for a really long time is obscuring how big a change we're happening. And the funny thing about these kinds of compromises is that they're not very technically challenging once you know what you're doing, right? It's like some of these things, you can pass a single HTTP request, like a GET request or a POST, and pull down an entire database, right? So it's like super easy. It's like the sort of hack that isn't really a hack, which I always think are the most interesting hacks. So it was remarkable to see that sort of play into this too. And we had been thinking, if these kind of new growing platforms are going to get compromised, we were guessing it would be a malware or a phishing thing, because those are the threats that pop up the most. So the fact that it ended up being an API, that was fascinating. And it wasn't even, like Malcolm alluded to this earlier, it wasn't somebody maliciously trying to pull down a dump. It was actually the web archive team, the folks that are going around and making sure that every day, like the snapshot of the internet and every single day is there so that people can look at those records. That was what actually ended up pulling down all this data, and then other people found it and duplicated it and moved it out elsewhere. So it was like one of these things about unintended consequences, right? And it's like, you design your API, and if you design it over lunch and you just kind of open everything up and you say, well, computers themselves aren't malicious, so I'm going to let it talk to all this stuff within my own environment, then someone's going to find that and someone's going to pull all this data down. So that was just like, with everything else, with the rapid timing and everything, that was one of the things that stood out to me as the most interesting.
Yeah.
There's sort of a funny old adage that you just made me recall, Sander, that I got told a long time ago when I was first starting out, which was, somebody told me that you should be very, very careful when you're just writing that simple shell script, and make sure to do it right, because inevitably that simple shell script will become, first of all, critical to the operation of your company. Second of all, be running as root.
Right.
And third of all, be exposed to the internet.
Yeah.
So you should try to write everything that you possibly can with the idea that it will someday be running with high privilege on the internet. Right. And I always kind of kept that in mind, right? I'm not saying that I always did it, but I always tried to keep it in mind. And it's another example of that unintended consequences. Like, maybe you start off with an API that is meant for internal use, or just does one simple thing that doesn't seem like it's any big deal. But then as you develop and grow, and you're a fast-paced company, you're doing a lot of really interesting stuff, you can end up in these weird situations where you never got around to doing the access control that you needed, or your interface is suddenly attached to a lot more data than you thought it was. things like that, right? So it's even something relatively simple ends up being really tremendously complex in pretty short order.
Yeah. It is. It's fascinating how that happens. You're right. The little script that you write, Malcolm, it becomes like the cornerstone, the foundation for everything the company's built on. 5 years later or whatever. It's crazy stuff. So hey, I wanted to pull in just a couple of quick comments of some people out there. M. Saeed, it's good to see you out there. First of all, mentioned that he once watched a video about finding credentials via checking codes on GitHub, and then all of a sudden, boom, SolarWinds thing, happens, and that it's kind of a related type situation. So yeah, it's an interesting, and Steve mentions interesting and scary. So yeah, it's a crazy world we live in out there. So who knows? Some people may be watching the predictions from the labs team and taking notes on that. Kevin Davies had a few notes. Napkin design. I know, Sandra, you mentioned, hey, if you develop an API over lunch, then this is what happens, right? Maybe it's your lunch napkin. Maybe I would say, hey, develop it over lunch and dinner. Maybe a little bit more time.
Yeah, it's a 2-meal feature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a 2-meal thing. And then Kevin Davies mentioned stops writing his ZSH script to listen. Nice. Way to go, Kevin. Way to stop and listen, before you do that. Pytil, good to see you out there too. An old company I work for said temporary is permanent. So Malcolm, kind of to your point, man. Awesome. That's awesome. Good stuff, man. So I just want to highlight some of the peeps commenting in. Really appreciate them doing that. So I guess with that in mind, we talked about some of these predictions you guys have made, and they've come true. And so as we look ahead to 2021, I wanted to get what's on your mind for 2021, and then also Sandra, I know you mentioned some in the past, that have come true. So I'm always fascinated to see like how many really are out there and how many have come true. But maybe we'll start with kind of the 2021 look ahead. What's on your mind? And really quick, I know this is kind of a long lead into this, but M. Saeed back again says any cloud security predictions on that list maybe for 2021. So I'll just throw it out there to you guys. What do you think?
You want to go first, Sandra, or shall I?
You go first, Malcolm.
All right,
All
man.
right. Here's where I go out on the limb live on the internet. But I think that, especially going to M. Saeed's point, cloud security is obviously going to be a really big thing. I've seen a lot of predictions recently that say that many enterprises are going to end up being in multi-cloud environments in the next year or two. Not just in one cloud environment. So we're going to be in this hybrid cloud mix of on-prem and different cloud provider situations. And I think that if I was thinking as an attacker, I would be starting to look at the way that those interoperate with each other as potential weak points. Because it's got all the hallmarks of places where you often find bugs or problems, which is you've got differing competing visions of how things should work. Groups of people who aren't talking to each other because they're actually competing with each other. So
yeah, different native
that would be
tool
where
sets.
I would be putting my attention. Different native tool sets, exactly, right? That'd be something that I would be thinking about.
That is a really quick. That's a fascinating point to make. That yeah, people talk about multi-cloud. You need to be in Amazon and Google and all the stuff. Azure, whatever. But yeah, Amazon has no. They're not required to talk to Azure or Google or coordinate things or whatever, right?
Right.
It's a fascinating thing to think about. Yeah, good to go. So Sandra, what are your thoughts, man?
Well, the thing that sort of got this, the observation that I made that sort of started this ball rolling on collecting the new ones was about phishing, and what I said was that I thought that the fact that phishing is a growing problem will, if it sort of keeps on going the way it is going to make email kind of worthless in the same way that all the scam calls that we had in the US over the last couple of years made it so that nobody ever picks up an unknown number anymore. So like telephones, it's not like they're completely ruined, because if you know who's calling you, you might pick it up, although these days everybody screens anyway, right? But what I was saying is that like that's kind of where we're going with email. But there was a specific thing about it, which is, I think, the thing that makes me the most worked up about it, which is that I got a mail from a security vendor in the space. I don't want to name them because it's not really their fault, right? And they were saying, hey, take this survey about your thoughts on security and we'll send you this Amazon $10 gift card. Okay, that's not the worst thing in the world. But then I was like, okay, I'm constantly going through this anti-phishing training, and I know that phishing is a really big deal. So I'm going to look at the link and see what kind of domain they want to send me to. And it was like the actual domain wasn't related to the actual security vendor. It wasn't even related to their marketing vendor. It was related to a third-party customer satisfaction survey provider that I had never heard of. And the top-level domain was .net. And then after that, the arguments in the URL after that was just a bunch of hex. It was just a bunch of mess that I couldn't decipher. Right? And it was like, I'm constantly told that I'm supposed to like look at the domain and look for HTTPS and all this stuff in order to avoid phishing. And this is a perfectly legitimate mail, I think, that I can't click on this and follow the rules about phishing training at the same time. Right. So what I was saying is like, it's one thing if email gets ruined because attackers are hitting us with so many phishing mails. It's another thing if real mails start to look more like phishing mails, which is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is like, unless sales and marketing teams kind of change their approach to sales and marketing, no one's ever going to open unsolicited email ever again. Right. So that was my first one. And it was actually really funny. I was talking with someone else just kind of casually at F5 about this article, and I asked if he wanted to throw somebody in. He's like, what you got so far? And I shared that with him. And he's like, well, hasn't that already happened? That's not a very good prediction. Like, we're already there. And which was a little discouraging to me. But I really think that it's like one of these things where security people are kind of tearing their hair out, trying to get people to stop clicking on phishing mails. And it's like just getting worse and worse. And one of our colleagues released a report a few months ago. There's basically the state of phishing and fraud right now. And it's like borderline running out of control. And meanwhile, you like this trend of people using all these third-party services for this stuff is only growing. And so that was the one that kind of got me kicked off. But there's another one that I'd actually like to highlight because it goes back to what Malcolm was saying about the cloud.
Yeah.
So one of the people that wrote a prediction for this one was our former director, Sarah Body, who now is a rung up from there. And Sarah has spent a lot of her career kind of beating the drum about vulnerability management and what a terrible job we as an industry are doing. And so her thing was saying that the sort of gradual failure of vulnerability management as a practice means that there's a lot of old code that just needs to get rewritten, but organizations aren't going to do it because it's too expensive. And we know that because for instance, if you look at the vulnerabilities that were targeted by those FireEye red team tools that got stolen, a lot of them were pretty old. These are like 3, 4, 5-year-old vulnerabilities. And one of the sort of preeminent red team organizations in the world is still using these as their go-to vulnerabilities, right? Like that tells you everything you need to know, right? And so this need to go back and look at an existing app, even if it's already generating revenue, and think about what the code base means from a security perspective, I think is not just important across the board, which it is. It's extra important in cloud, right? Because it's like you talk to security people about moving to the cloud and everyone's like, don't lift and shift, redesign, like re-architect your security controls from the ground up, really do it right. And then when you talk to a lot of kind of cloud architects, people that are helping organizations move to the cloud, lift and shift is what we're seeing on the ground, right? So there's, I would even sort of take Sarah's observation about vulnerability management. I would apply that to cloud computing across the board at the moment. It's unfortunately, it's kind of in a state of chaos.
Yeah. Vulnerability. Yeah. I mean, to your point, if you're an attacker or bad guy, and a CVE that's 5+ years old is like your go-to, and no one even cares about patching it at all or whatever, then just keep walking through that door. It's wide open, right?
Yeah.
So people shut that door. Shut the door. So Malcolm, go ahead.
Along with that, Sandra, I think that's got some really, really good points there. Especially in a couple of different ways. One of which is I think there's always a little bit of a delay as we move to newer. I mean, the cloud's not new anymore, but newer technologies. We're dragging along old ways of doing things into new paradigms, right? And we run into problems when we do that. And so your point about rebuilding security controls from the ground up in the cloud, I think is really, really well taken. But along with that, did I just lose my point? I think I might have just lost my point. Give me a second here.
This is what I like to say in these moments. If the thought really belonged to you, it will come back to you.
It will, I'm sure. It will.
If it's really yours. Yeah.
Actually, no, I remember.
You were talking about old ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So old ways of doing things, new ways of doing things, right? So the other thing about that is that the way that we do vulnerability classification when we're doing vulnerability, remediation and so forth, is we have this nice little system where we've got low, medium, high, et cetera. I think a lot of times we end up mistaking those for being kind of absolute values and not necessarily looking at the vulnerability in a deep enough way to assess whether or not it is maybe lower or higher priority in our specific environment. Because one of the other things about the FireEye tools or the FireEye vulns was that at least one was classified as medium, but it was a remote file inclusion vulnerability or a file upload vulnerability. I forget either way, but it could actually lead to code execution. Now, it was classified as a medium. A lot of organizations would, if they're doing a really quick assessment, would say medium, we don't need to deal with that right away. But if you happen to be in a situation where the specifics of that vulnerability would allow an attacker to execute code or to, make more of it than perhaps that vulnerability rating would imply, you were going to be in a lot worse shape. Mm-hmm. So, once again, I think it's getting more focused on, in some ways, the specifics of your specific environment and how things work in that specific environment, be that you're on-prem or your cloud, yields benefits, right? But it does add complexity and it adds effort.
Yeah, so, I've even received pen test reports from outside pen testers that rated something as a medium, and only if you read the text description of the vulnerability they found did you realize that within the environment that we were actually running, that we were talking about, this was a really big deal, right? And so it's like if you had just taken that and you took off all the highs, the reds, and you showed them to the boss and you said, we're gonna fix these, you might not realize that you were actually leaving a huge hole open, right? Mm-hmm. So it is really all about the details at that level.
Yeah. Yeah, you've certainly got to know your own application, your own environment, right?
Yeah.
You can't just take the overall worldwide average and just assume that same average number is your number, right? So that's exactly right. Awesome, man. Well, hey, yeah, fantastic thoughts. I was going to highlight a couple of quick things here from a couple other people really quick, which we're almost out of time, man. The time just flies when you're having fun, right, guys? Yeah. So with Sandra and Malcolm, it's just fantastic every time. But hey, I wanted to highlight Rodolfo Nutzman out there. It's good to see you, Rodolfo. So he says this is more of a bad omen than maybe a prediction, but I guess there was some Brazilian taxpayer stuff that got leaked, 220 million. So goodness, I feel like leaks and data breaches and all that, it's more the norm than the exception nowadays. I kind of feel like, as an internet user myself, I just sort of go in with the assumption that all my stuff is out there, like somebody's got it, right? So I just need to work from that assumption, right? Yeah, it's crazy stuff. So and then get Jason Rahm, man, my buddy Jason Rahm. He sarcastically, tongue in cheek, says, "What's 220 million amongst all the internet do-gooders?" Right? I mean, everyone on the internet does great things, right? Good stuff. And then Kevin Davies had another good point. He says email's already ruined. He doesn't use it except for external communication, Slack all the way for Kevin. So anyway, and that's Sandra, kind of to your point. When we talk about the death of email, possibly, something would have to replace that. And I know we don't have time to go into all of it today, but that's going to be interesting to see what kind of solutions people come up with to say, you've got the WhatsApp, you've got the chat, the Teams, the Slack, all that stuff, right? But that's more for, a lot of that in my mind is more for like hey, that's right now. And if you don't see it right now, you're going to lose it in the stream of consciousness. Right. So it'll be interesting to see what people come up with to maybe replace email. So
absolutely.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, fellas, maybe I'll give you a chance, like one last little nugget here before we wrap up. The 30 minutes has come and gone, and it's man, I wish we had 30 more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah. Sandra, any last thoughts, real quick?
Yeah, there was another one that one of our colleagues threw in that I thought was kind of fun. Real quickly, I'll call out Lori McVitie, who works in the office of the CTO at F5. She made one about a prediction that smart homes will start being taken over hostage through ransomware, which is pretty self-explanatory, and I think we can all agree is the most fun prediction here. That's like the one that is the most heartwarming, right? Imagining somebody on their phone outside their house in the snow, locked out. But one of our colleagues, Sean Backer, who lives in Singapore, he made a prediction that we're going to start seeing more use of automation and bots to manipulate metrics and telemetry on the web. And I think that this one is interesting for a few reasons. It's interesting because it's another like no hack, right? You don't have to go in anybody's network to pull this thing off. And it's actually really interesting to think about how many organizations use these kind of automated metrics and telemetry as KPIs to see how good a job they're doing, right? There are people whose compensation hinges on these kinds of metrics. And so it's not just the sneaker bots, which are sort of this like weird and fascinating little corner of the internet, but the idea of using bots to skew metrics, to waste compute bandwidth and competitors. There's a lot of stuff like that has been theoretically possible for a while. And now we're starting to see more and more of it. So he made a prediction here about it. He also, in the meantime, in between writing this prediction and it actually getting published, he even tested it out on our own site. And he made a little botnet, ran it through a bunch of different proxies so that it all wouldn't hit as the same IP address. And actually we used it to skew our own web metrics. And it worked. It totally worked. He let a couple people know ahead of time so that nobody got fired. And he made a little proof of concept on this thing, which I thought was really cool. So that was an interesting one and sort of another reminder about when you change the way that we do things, we also create new opportunities for attackers. So
yeah, that's fantastic stuff. That'll be super interesting to follow that whole logic. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Good to go. Malcolm, any last thoughts?
Not really. I mean, I think I probably ought to retire on my laurels here now that I've nailed one. But I would just say to everybody out there, keep doing what we're doing. The stuff that we do matters. It really does. And even though it may seem like there's an awful lot of chaos and difficulty, I think what would it be like if we weren't doing anything? So let's keep going.
Yeah, I shudder to think what it would be like if we didn't have the Sanders and the Malcolms of the world out there helping us stay safe. Well, gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you here today. The time has flown by for me. I know for everyone else as well. We are all the better for it. So thank you so much for being here. And I will bid you guys a good day. So thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thanks
Take care.
All right, take care. All righty. Well, man, what a fantastic security sidebar with Sandra and Malcolm. Just a couple of great guys. It's awesome to know in the chaos and the craziness of the world and the internet we live in, to know that guys like Sandra and Malcolm are out there helping keep us safe and thinking about these things and leading the way with thought leadership. So thanks to everybody for tuning in today. It's always a pleasure. I always love Thursdays to connect with everyone. Hey, we'll be back next Thursday, me and Jason on DevCentral Connects next Thursday at 12:30. So make sure you join us there. And again, as we always say, thank you to all of you for making this community what it is. It is because of you that this is the greatest online community in the world. So thanks so much, and we will see all of you out there in the community. Good day.